All right, everyone. Last topic of the semester. Um, in this last presentation, we're going to go over resiliency and transition towns. So we've already talked about resiliency. Transition towns focuses on resiliency. So this idea of transition is something that it's pretty modern. You know, about a couple decades old, 2006, 2007. The creator of this, or the originator of this concept, is Rob Hopkins. He wrote a book, if you're interested, called The Transition Handbook. You can find all kinds of literature out there, TED Talks, which I posted. There's a website, there's a transition website. There's probably a local transition website, depending on where you are. So this is something that it's a global phenomenon, but it's a local in focus. And I just want to go back to this. This is one of the slides from the very first weeks, of the semester. And I put this in here because I want to sort of like show we're sort of tying everything up in a bow here. We're coming back to where we started. We're basically wrapping it all up, if you will. And transition addresses all of these concepts, which really are focused on resiliency. So number one, we have limits to growth. We've gone over that a number of times. The fact that we can't grow forever on a finite planet. Transition Town recognizes this and tries to help us establish sort of ways of living that we can live within our means. The idea behind systems thinking, transition is very systems oriented, just like permaculture and a lot of the other concepts. But a really fundamental aspect of transition and the transition movement is that we have to think holistically, and we have to sort of work together to solve these really big problems. It focuses on responses, not just solutions. So really the idea behind transition towns is that we can't determine these like one-size-fits-all solutions to every problem from somewhere else. So we really need to be ready to respond to all of anything that happens now and in the future, and not just come up with like, okay, here's a problem, here's the solution. It's like, here's how you design a community so that when additional problems come up, you sort of can respond on your own. Okay. Really fundamental is that we must prepare for uncertainty. That's really the core, one of the core ideas behind transition towns, is recognizing that things are going to change. There's going to be climate change. There's going to be other issues. There's going to be another economic collapse at some point, etc. So we need to prepare for those eventualities. Things are going to happen. We need to be prepared. So it's better to be proactive than reactive. And really, really fundamental, and I can't stress this enough, transition towns are very active, they're very engaged, they are very solutions focused, they're very actions oriented. So it's like, yes, we will sit down and discuss the nature of all these different issues that we need to address, but we're not just going to sit here and talk about them. We are going to do things. We're going to meet, we're going to discuss what's our best solution locally, how are we going to do it, make things happen. Really important aspect of it. Really, really fundamental. The power of a community. If you see here, this is a little documentary which I think is pretty interesting. I think I found it on YouTube before for free, but it's about what happened in Cuba after the Soviet Union fell in the late 80s, early 90s, and they basically had to go through a transition, a post-oil transition, because they had all their it was a communist country, etc. And when the Soviets fell, they lost all their support. And Cuba has very little native resources, so they sort of had to learn how to transition to this post-carbon, post-oil economy. And so it's some pretty interesting lessons in there. I think this quote is really important because this kind of sums things up in a lot of ways. And that is, if we try to do it on our own, it will be too little. If we wait for the government to do it, it will be too late. If we can gather together with those around us in our community, it might just be enough, and it might just be in time. And this is really fundamental to the transition movement. And that's, we can't act as individuals if we want to solve these big problems. But also, a big part of transition is like while we recognize that policy solutions are important, we can't wait for the government to solve our problems. It's the only way to really solve these problems is to get together with our communities and make the like real boots on the ground impact within our communities. Yes, we need to make personal changes, and yes, we need to advocate for policies, but the real rubber meets the road in the community level, and that's really where transition towns thrive. I mean, they are all about meeting and doing things as a community. So just a little background on it. It's the transition town movement started in 2007. Really important that the change comes from the bottom up, as you noticed from that last quote, that we need to make the change. We need to, if we want something to change, like, it happens here. It happens in our community. So this is very bottom up oriented. Again, it's sort of, they try to put a positive spin on everything. They see challenges as opportunities, kind of like a permaculture notion, turning problems into solutions. It's like, look, we know that, like, right, what's happening, as I dictate this in the spring of 2022, gas prices just shot up incredibly, right? That's been a challenge for people. And so from a transition perspective, it's like, let's take that as a lesson. What can we do to use that to our advantage? So oil prices are high, gas prices are high. Let's advocate for more local foods, more electric cars, more electric bikes, more local everything. Getting off of fossil fuels. Okay, so these challenges that we're presented with, we see them as opportunities. And not only do we recognize it, but we are like, we're doing something about it. Okay, again, thinking locally is absolutely essential. It's all about local engaged action. Again, they recognize the government tends to be reactive. We need to be more proactive. And one of the important aspects of acting locally is that, if you're acting locally, you're meeting with your community members. Almost by nature, you're going to be addressing your own local needs. Okay, and of course you can keep an eye on the broader issues, but really that's where every community has their own needs, and you need to figure out what those needs are and how to address them on a local level. Emissions reduction is essential. Building resiliency is absolutely essential. Again, they recognize that climate change is going to happen. They recognize that bad things are going to happen, and we need to do something to prepare for that. Community-based, practical action, meaningful change through shared action. Again, it's all about community, all about doing something. And I really like this aspect here, because I think in our sort of modern times, it's really easy to feel powerless. And they say the last thing we need to do at this point in history is for people to feel powerless. Like, we need to recognize that we do have the power to change what we see out there that needs to be changed. Like, if you see it locally happening, make a change. Do what you can to change it. Right? So engaged optimism and transition groups, transition towns, transition meetings. They really try to remain optimistic. Like, look, I know gas prices are high, or I know food prices are high, or I know it's getting warmer and people can't afford their electricity or whatever. Recognize the problem and, like, let's do something about it. Like, come on, everyone, let's get together. Like, it's very rah-rah and, they try to see the glass half full, which I think is very important, because there's a lot of research that shows if you are more positive and you're sort of, instead of saying like, everything sucks, like, the world's collapsing, but we can try to do something about it. That kind of depresses people, and it's less likely to stir them into action. You got to be like, look, we're having a great time. Let's join the movement, and do it with joy and do it with fervor and vigor, and you're more likely to get people to come along with you. So just some core assumptions of the transition movement. Number one, and this is where really it all started. It's kind of moved a little bit beyond this, but this is really where it started. That life with dramatically lower energy consumption is inevitable. Okay, so energy is going to be more expensive. Energy is going to become more scarce. We need to be ready for that. And the fact is that our communities, our settlements, our cities, our economies are all so dependent on oil and fossil fuels that we need to prepare for the shock that will happen if fossil fuel prices spike like they have in spring of 2022. Everybody's freaking out. Like, if we could sort of get off of oil or not be so dependent upon oil, that won't be as bad. Again, we have to act collective. We have to act now. It's all about action. It's all about acting together. They recognize the sort of collective genius, if you will, of everyone around us. Okay, and they trust that local communities are the best suited to come up with local solutions. So Rob Hopkins isn't up there in his place over in in England saying like you need to do this and you need to do this, etc. He's saying, look, here's our goals, here's our fundamental principles. You as a community figure it out, and that's absolutely fundamental to it. It's viral, it's open source, so there's a global transition community that just says, look, here's what I've done, here's what I found works. Steal my idea, take my idea, apply it, modify it, whatever. It's very much like, hey, it's not like, hey, this is my idea, tell me if you want to use it. It's like, look, here it is, use it. I'm happy to help, help you with your own community, but really, you just use other people's ideas as inspiration. It's generally pretty joyful, even though we're addressing these really big problems. It's supposed to be like, hey, let's get together, let's solve this, let's be really positive about it. Very solutions focused. So it's just a kind of a great overall philosophy, a great way to sort of approach how to establish more sustainable communities, because it's very focused on the community, very positive, very action oriented. When they talk about resilience, I think an interesting way to think about resiliency. So up until this point, we've defined resiliency as the ability to bounce back after a shock to the system, right? So like, you design your lifestyle in such a way that if oil prices go up, it doesn't really, you can bounce back after the oil price goes back down. But the concept of adaptive resilience, I think, is really important, because if you think about it, we really don't want to bounce back to where we were before. Like, this lifestyle that we're generally living, right? So very heavy on fossil fuels, non-renewable resources, and so forth. The transition movement is kind of like, look, we need to get away from that. So when oil prices go up, etc., when we come back, so to speak, we should come back to a different lifestyle that's actually more sustainable. So that's adaptive resilient. We're resilient, but we're adapting as we go. And again, it's another one of those philosophies that that recognizes that we need to live within our ecological limits. So as I said, transition towns are very much focused on the ground solutions and doing things. So some examples of transition projects. I love these. I love the transition philosophy because it is very solutions oriented, and it's very much like locally oriented. And there's all kinds of things that you can do to help your own area become more transition oriented. So community gardens, community supported agriculture, urban farms. If you're interested in local currency, that's a really there's a couple of places like Ithaca has their Ithaca bucks, which are money that you can only use in Ithaca, which may sound sort of strange, but if you think about money, it's just a promissory note, right? Like, I have $5, and you recognize or agree that this money is worth a certain amount. It's really an agreement, right? And all these stores and everyone agrees that the US dollar is worth this much. Well, you can create your own. There's nothing preventing you from creating your own currency. And so in fact, that's what some people have done. And what that does is that keeps your resources local. It keeps the the sort of interactions local. You can also do things like time banking, which is sort of similar. So Media, Pennsylvania, I'm recording this video in North Wilmington in Delaware, so I'm about half an hour from Media, Pennsylvania. They are a transition town, so they have a lot of these movements, a lot of these initiatives in their town. One of my favorites is the Free Store, which is a free store. So everything's free, everything's donated, all the staff are volunteer. So very big equity component to a lot of these transition ideas as well. So time banking, as I mentioned, is something. Time bank is a really cool idea where your time is your currency. And so for most of these, all hours are treated equally. So if I am whatever, I'm a solar expert, and I know how to install solar. I sort of pay you with my time. So I design and install a solar array. I spend 10 hours doing it. So I have 10 hours in my bank. So hours are in the bank. And so now I have 10 hours, and if I have someone that, whatever, I'm away at work and I need someone to walk my dog for an hour, I can use an hour of their time because I have that time in my bank, right? So your time is your currency. So it's really interesting because it's equitable because everybody's skills are treated equally. And it gets away from this whole like money is everything type of philosophy. It gets away from the consumer culture and more into sort of like this bartering culture where it's really what we're trading is resources. Reskilling is a really big part of transition towns. So reskilling refers to sort of learning a lot of these skills that we used to be really good at in general. You know, mending clothes, fixing your own bike, fixing your own car, fixing your own house, growing your own food, canning, all that stuff. Okay, so that's something that makes you more resilient, right? So if you're not dependent, like if my shirt rips and I don't have to either buy a new shirt or take it to somebody to fix it, and I can do it on my own, that makes me more resilient, makes me more self-reliant, you know, so you can sort of keep all that locally and even personally. Solarize, so solar energy is a really big part of the transition movement because you have much more control over your own energy source. So media has a solarized media. There's all kinds of sort of solarized movements all over the place. So all of these are just a small sampling of some really common transition projects. And the idea is you can access information about all of these on the transition website. You can go to media and talk to people about their ideas, and they generally will freely share them with you. But the key is that all of these help to contribute to self-sufficiency and resiliency, living more sustainably, reducing your resource use, having more circular economy, and so forth. Okay, so that does it for the transition town discussion, and this is the last lesson of this course, and I hope you enjoyed it.